Assistant Professor of English, serving at EGRA SSB College right now. Uh, I, on behalf of the organizers, would like to welcome you all to this online lecture series that we have started since 17th of this March, and right now we are almost on the verge of completing it. This is the 13th day and the straight 16th lecture in the lecture series. And for our today's session, we have among us Dr. Saurabh Nag. Let me introduce Dr. Saurabh Nag briefly. Dr. Saurabh Nag is an assistant professor in English at Ondathana Mahavidyalaya, affiliated to Bankura University. He has published widely in various national and international journals, earned his doctoral degree for his thesis on Gogiwa Thiong'o. He was invited by the University of in a conference on post-colonial oceans. He holds a substantive post at Khatra Adivasi Mahavidyalaya. He has taught as a guest faculty at the University of Burdwan and Netaji Subhash Bose Open University. We really are very glad and honored to have such a distinguished speaker among us. Sir, now I would like to hand over the forum to you to enlighten our students and us as well. Please, sir, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. At the very beginning, I extend my heartfelt thanks to the faculty members, Department of English, Kharagpur College, and EGRA College, because as I found that both colleges are jointly collaborating in the webinar. I congratulate Joyanto and Chinmoy, among many others, for organizing such a wonderful web lecture series. My lecture will not be a kind of scholarly presentation, but a sort of class lecture designed specially for the students. Chinmoy had requested me to frame my lecture keeping the syllabus in mind, and I have chosen W.B. Yeats's two poems, The Second Coming and The Wild Swans at Cool, because I found these two poems to be prescribed in the syllabus of the university. Now my lecture is divided into three major parts. In the first part, I will deal with Yeats and the mockery of time, that is titled Temporality in Yeats. In the second part, I will deal with Yeats and literature. In the third part, I will offer a detailed discussion on the two poems, The Second Coming and The Wild Swans at Cool. Yes, is the PowerPoint visible to everyone?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. In the very first page of this PowerPoint, I have chosen three photos of W.B. Yeats, two of Yeats and the other of Yeats's medieval tower-like house, just 3 km away from the Cool Park that was owned by the Gregories. The place is called Thur Balili, and the word Thur is a Celtic word for tower. From Thur to Thor, and Thor actually means tower. It is a tower-like building, and I will show you some other pictures later on. So W.B. Yeats, according to Marjorie Howes, had a very long literary career, and very few writers and had careers as long and complex and varied as W.B. Yeats. What is important in Howes's observation is the temporality. When we talk of something very long or short, we of course speak on temporal terms. So the temporality that allowed Yeats to keep on writing for 3 generations of readers, namely the Romantic, the Victorian, and the Modern. The widely stretched literary career of Yeats was marked by variety, complexity, and dynamism. Yeats is perhaps one of the very few poets whose career underwent such drastic changes and transformation. And Yeats, as a man and a poet, he has mentioned in many of his writings that I am, I am changing myself. So dynamism is one of the important characteristics of Yeatsian canon. He was a man of unpredictable talent and action, and he did things at such stages of life that no other human being would ever think of doing. For example, he founded the Ghost Club in 1911 when the entire Europe was banking on the Lockean rationalism and empiricism. Yeats was practicing practicing the supernatural things. He was regularly uh, uh, conducting planchet sessions and very other different things, many other different things after being rejected. Another example of Yeats and the mockery of time is his multiple rejection by Modcon. Everybody knows about uh, this rejection, and what is most surprising is that he, at his 60s, proposed Modcon's daughter. When he was rejected by the mother, he went on and proposed the daughter Isolde when she was just 25, 21. And finally, he was again rejected by South, and he finally married 25-year-old Georgia Hyde Lees. Yeats used the word romantic potentially and politically in two places. I will mention those two poems in which Yeats directly mentions the word romantic. The first one is September 1930, in which Yeats wrote, I'm quoting from the poem, Romantic Ireland's dead and gone. It's with O'Leary in the grave. The Clearly the poet is lamenting the loss of the romantic vision from Ireland, from his Ireland. Another poem in which he used the term romantic is Cool Park and Ballylee 1931. I'm quoting from that poem also. We were the last romantics. And the phrase last romantics has been used by many critics to define the genre of W.B. Yeats's writing. We were the last romantics chose for theme traditional sanctity and loveliness. Whatever's written in what poet's name, the book of the people, whatever most can blaze the mind of man or elevate a rhyme. So Yeats, though he was writing uh, in the first decades of the 20th century, and very famously, he chose to call himself the last romantic. That is quite significant about W.B. Yeats. Here in the presentation, I have tried to summarize some of the basic tenets of Yeatsian literature. The first one is called Yeats's romantic longings. The second one, his Victorian doubts. The third one, his modernist rage, his love for occultism, his love for folklore, and his love for poetics, and his involvement, very active involvement in the politics of Ireland. Yeats's romantic vision was paid politically by O'Leary and literally by Lady Gregory. His early romanticism lasted from 1880s to 1890s. William Blake, P.B. Shelley had immense influence upon his romantic vision. He even wrote an essay on Shelley. The title of the essay is The Philosophy of Shelley's Poetry. And in his essay, he praised Shelley's notion of beauty that Shelley had derived from Plato. And this was not the beauty of the body. It was not the beauty of the appearance, but beauty of the intellect. And that is why it is called the intellectual beauty. And he used that kind of notion that he inherited from Shelley and from Plato in his poem To the Rose Upon the Rood of Time. Yeats, in the poem, identified the rose with intellectual beauty in a purely romantic way. In the opening lines of the poem, he invokes the rose of many dimensions. I'm quoting just two lines from this poem. Red rose, proud rose, sad rose of all my days, come near me while I sing the ancient ways. The phrase ancient ways is very important because Yeats, throughout his career, has returned back to those ancient days, back into the mythical world, back into the occult, etc. In the poem, the rose is not a symbol of nature, but also the intellectual beauty of the Irish myths, especially of the Druid and Cuchulainn. For the students, Druid was a priest-like figure, and Cuchulainn was a knight in the Ulster cycle of Celtic mythology. Blake had particularly influenced Yeats. He was very much impressed with Blake's the contraries. In his vision, Yeats has very famously written, my mind had been full of Blake from boyhood up, and I saw the world as a conflict, spectre, and emanation, and could distinguish between a contrary and a negation. Spectre and emanation. Spectre may represent the past, and emanation may represent the future. So you see that, like Blake, Yeats was also very fond of contraries, and he wrote, contraries are positive, a negation is not a contrary. We can see the impact of Romanticism on the mature Yeats in some of his poems, namely The Tower, the poem, and also the name of the collection, his anthology, The Tower. The Tower, the poem particularly, is based on his medieval house, castle-like house called Thur Balili that I have already mentioned at the very beginning of this lecture. And this Balili Yeats bought in 1970, and later he made an extensive restoration uh, to that place. The other poems that may be called romantic poems by Yeats are in memory of Major Robert Gregory, uh, Cool Park and Ballylee 1931, Meditations in Time of Civil War, The Phases of the Moon, Blood and the Moon, The Winding Stair, and The Wild Swans at Cool. Uh, when Yeats entered into the Romantic age, he was very much comforted by the reign of Queen Victoria, but he was much against the scientific rationalism of the time. And this hatred of Yeats against scientific rationalism defines his romantic dimension of thought, dimension of vision. Because you know that uh, all the romantics, all the romantics loved uncertainty, ration, reason, empirical knowledge. These were very much limited for the romantics. They never ran after these things. They ran after imagination. They ran after the possibilities and the certainties. What Keats termed negative capability later and later to his brothers George. Uh, so he wrote in a vision, I was unlike others of my generation in only one thing. I'm very religious, and deprived by Huxley and Tyndale, whom I detested, of the simple-minded religion childhood, of my childhood. Uh, I had made a new religion almost as infallible charge of poetic tradition. What is the most important phrase in the quotation is a charge of poetic tradition, mind it. He has faith in no other churches as the religious institutions, but the charge of poetic tradition. And here, Yeats may sound like Matthew Arnold, who finds poetry to be the last resort of man. Aspects of the pre-Raphaelite art are notable in some of his poems, especially the poems included in the anthology The Wind Among the Reeds, especially the figures of women present in the poems. They seem to have been drawn from the paintings of Rossetti. In his introduction to the Oxford Book of Modern Verse, that Yeats pronounced with in a clear, very candid tone, I too have tried to be modern. In this quotation, you see Yeats' cynicism about the modernist ways of life and the modernist ways of uh, uh, representing life in literature. Yeats was not very much favorable to modernism. He was not very much fond of the modernist ways of representing things, how Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot were doing. He said that I have tried to be modern, meaning he was not a modern. He was not a modernist. He tried to be modern. It's the struggle. He had struggled hard to sound like a modernist poet. So the cynicism in the utterance is quite palpable. Okay, and he wrote few poems that can be termed as Yeats's modernist poem. I am just entering into the particular poems that I am going to discuss today. I have already mentioned the first one is The Second Coming, and the second one is the Wild Swans at Cool. Uh, Let me show you the poem first. Yes, I know that the font is very small. I don't know whether you can see them clearly or not. Can you read the poem clearly on your screen? No,
No, it's a bit difficult to read it clearly.
it's very difficult to read. Okay, I will read it out for you. Just try to follow. Actually, the slides are so small; it gives us very little room. The Second Coming. The poem is perhaps one of the most popular poems by Yeats and has been prescribed by many universities. And the poem, The Second Coming, is read as an apocalyptic poem from a Christian vision. But The Second Coming is not just a Christian poem, an apocalyptic poem, it is a kind of universal poem. And in my reading of The Second Coming, I will be quoting from Bloom and others to show that The Second Coming is often misread. The poem was first published in the anthology Michael Robartis and the Dancer. Yeats wrote a few apocalyptic poems, such as The Magi, The Second Coming, 1919, Leda and the Swan, Two Songs from a Play, Meru, etc. These are called the apocalyptic poems. Yeats was deriving the apocalyptic vitalism in the manner of Blake, says Bloom. Donald Davy has remarked that the title of the poem is a misnomer. I will begin this from the title. The title of the poem is misnomer according to Donald Davy. Why misnomer? Because Yeats, in his draft, chose the title The Second Birth. Later, he altered the title. He changed birth with coming. And the whole dimension of the poem changed. The second birth primarily refers to the second birth of Jesus, as well as the second birth of the existing civilization. But the moment he replaced birth with coming, the dimension changed. And critics started to think that he was simply referring to the resurrection, the final resurrection on the doomsday of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus, to judge the world, to judge humankind and punish the sinners and reward the virtuous people. But the poem has a wider dimension than this uh, Christian dimension. It has a broader dimension. The poem, according to Davy, should have been called The Second Birth, that Yeats had selected in his drafts, and later he revised it. Probably, Yeats in the poem is referring to the second coming of Jesus, as I have already told you, as well as the second coming of a sphinx-like figure. Now, the moment we say second coming, whose second coming? Is it the second coming of Jesus? In the Bible, there is no hint what will happen after the apocalypse. It's just mentioned in the last chapter of the Bible that Jesus will come and he will judge. And that's why the day is called the day of the great judgment, the last judgment, etc. So Jesus will come and judge us. Is it a second coming of Jesus? If it is the second coming of Jesus, why did Yeats refer to Bethlehem and the rocking cradle in the last section of the poem? Because Jesus is not going to be born as a baby. According to the Bible, he is not going to be born as a baby. He will come and judge us. So you see, somewhere down the line, there is some kind of confusion. Yet, according to critics like Daniel Albright, he wrote the poem with the help of the words that he got during the automatic sessions. That is an important thing the students must know. Yeats was fond of occultism. Occult, you know. And with Georgie and Gregor Mathers, he had regular sessions. The sessions were like planchette sessions. And later, Georgie said somewhere that the words, many words that were later included in the poem, Yeats got those words during those sessions. Georgie used to hold a cardboard symbol to Yeats's head, and Yeats could envision by closing his eyes. Yeats wrote, "There rose before me mental images that I could not control. A desert and black Titan raising himself up by his two hands from the middle of a heap of ancient ruins." Now you see, the reference to the Titan is very significant. If Yeats had envisioned Titan or a Titan-like figure, why should we refer to the second coming of Jesus? Because Titan was one of the old gods in the pagan mythology, in the Greek mythology, you know. And there were several Titans. Prometheus was also a Titan, one of the Titans. I am continuing the quotation. Heap of ancient ruins. Later, Mathers explained that he had seen a being of the order of salamanders because he had shown me their symbol. They had shown me their symbol. So, Yeats, after that session, shown the symbol of salamander to that Mathers. So you see that Yeats was envisioning something else. And we interpret the poem from a different angle. I'm not rejecting the existing because it seems to be relevant to some extent, but I'm simply trying to explore the other possibilities while reading the poem. And this Daniel Albright, he says that the poem looks like a transcript of an automatic process of image evocation. The poet empties his mind until it becomes a tabula rasa. Then in the blank desert, there appear complicated intraocular effects in the center of a vision, etc. Let us go back to the poem. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Now in the first line, there is a reference to a gyre. And this is one of the central symbols of the poem. The gyre and its images. And in the screen you can see, I hope, the picture of a gyre. Now, what the gyre is and where from did Yeats derive the idea of the gyre? Yeats derived the idea of the gyre from Plato's idea of the coiled spring. And in the picture, you can see that there are two types of gyres: double gyres, placed contrariwise, and both are in motion. Now, what happens when both the gyres move? They produce centripetal as well as centrifugal forces. And these two refer to the possibility of having order and disorder at the same time. Plato in the Republic has mentioned a coiled spring. He says that if the world is ruled by God, man journeys from old age to childhood. I repeat, if the world is controlled by God, man journeys from old age to childhood. But if the reverse happens, if God abandons the world, man journeys from childhood to old age. Now, this Platonic idea of a man journeying from old age to childhood fed the vision of Milton. Milton, glorified childhood innocence in the Paradise Lost, and that he called Beulah. Later, Wordsworth explored the theme in many of his odes, such as the Immortality Ode, etc. So, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the gyre is gradually widening, and since the gyre is gradually widening, the periphery is moving further from the center. The center cannot hold. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. The falcon is man, the falconer is God. So, to some extent, there is a reference to the failure of authority. Somehow, the control is lost. The magnetism is lost. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The poem was written in 1919 and published in 1921. So you see, the poem was written in the aftermath of the First World War. And of course, the anarchy Yeats witnessed in the world that was loosened after the First World War, he was perhaps referring to that kind of loosening of the anarchy, how order has been ruined and anarchy has been established. The blood-dimmed tide is loose, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The bloody tide is flowing, and the ceremony of innocence is drowned. This word innocence is not just a simple word. It also refers to the Platonic idea of innocence. It also refers to the Platonic idea of innocence. What Plato talked about innocence in his metaphor of the coiled spring, that when the world is ruled by God, man moves from old age to childhood. So it is about the ceremony of innocence. The innocence is drowned, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. What appeals to us is the universal message that Yeats is trying to hold up. The universal message. If you read the poem today, the lines are very relevant. If you read the poem 50 years after, the lines will remain relevant. So the universal appeal of these lines, that the innocence is drowned and the worst are full of passionate intensity, not only refers to the post-World War scenarios of Europe, but also these lines may refer to the present situations. Anyone familiar with vision must have already seen that Yeats is using his famous wheel and cone figures in the poem. that are subdivided into constantly moving and interrelated phases that I have already told you about the double gyre, and doubled into a mirror image of itself. The two gyres are mirror image of to each other. A second cone sharing a central point of greatest intensity. This double cone has a shadow other, its wide end linked to the narrow point of the other by means of a mysterious force of compression. In the aftermath of war and revolution, the poet wrote it, but according to Bloom, Yeats was particularly concerned about the Russian Revolution and its menace, particularly the menace of the Russian Revolution to aristocrats. In a way, instantly familiar to a student of Blake and Shelley as Yeats was the revolution suggests an apocalypse. For a romantic, any sort of revolution is apocalyptic. And the time of travel preceding it. But unlike the romantic precursor, Yeats is on the side of the counter-revolutionaries. And his apocalyptic poem begins by seeing the intervention against revolution as being too late to save the ceremoniously innocent. And he wrote in vision, the Germans are now to Russia come, though every day some innocent has died. So you see how concerned Yeats was about the Russian Revolution. I'm reading the second part of the poem. Surely some revelation is at hand. The word revelation is very important. And again, it is one of the sources of misunderstanding because the last chapter of the Bible is called Revelation. And in this chapter, the second coming of Jesus is prophesied. Surely some revelation is at hand, but that revelation may not refer to the biblical message also. Revelation may refer to the vision that Yeats was seeing, that Yeats was experiencing during those automatic sessions. Surely some revelation is at hand, surely coming is at hand, the second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi. Now, what is Spiritus Mundi? Spiritus Mundi is said to be the spirit of the world, spirit of the creation. Northrop Frye wrote a book and chose the title for the book by quoting that phrase Spiritus Mundi from this poem. By Spiritus Mundi, we may understand the spirit of the world. That means the entire creation. The entire creation is supposed to have a spirit, is supposed to have a throbbing, lively spirit. If you read the Indian schools of philosophy, you will understand, especially the Naya school, especially the Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, etc. You will see that both Ramanujan and Shankara are talking about a spirit, a playfulness in creation. That creation came out of the playfulness of Brahman. Okay, so Spiritus Mundi may refer to the spirit of the world, that core of life, that core of creation. So the Spiritus Mundi that created the universe will create an anarchist, will create a destroyer. And Yeats was envisioning the destroyer in one of those automatic sessions. What did he see? Troubles my sight, somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man. Lion body and the head of a man reminds us of Sphinx. But in this poem, Yeats is not referring to a female monster. No, he is referring to a male one. And here we may allude to Blake's Urizen. You know that Blake in the book of Urizen referred to destructive energy represented by an old figure, and Urizen is supposed to be one of the visionary, one of the what should I say, one of the representatives of Blake's idea of experience. Okay, so for Yeats, the creature, the monster-like creature, half lion and half man, maybe maybe a version of Blake's Urizen or Urizenic monster. Okay. A shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gauge, black and pitiless of the sun, as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of indignant desert birds. The desert birds are indignant. The desert birds are afraid because of the approach, sudden approach of that monster. And one thing particular we are reminded of here, that is Ozymandias. I hope many of you have read the poem. Shelley, as a student, wrote the poem Ozymandias, and the image of that destructive, that ruined debris of the statue of Ozymandias somehow stuck to his mind forever. Real shadows of the indignant desert birds, the darkness drops again. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. That is the point I was hammering on since the beginning. By a rocking cradle. Now, what does this cradle refer to? Is it referring to the second coming of Jesus? If we follow the Bible, there is no mention that Jesus will be born as a baby. No, that Jesus will be coming back to this earth as a judge. So what does the rocking cradle suggest? And what to position the phrase rocking cradle if we are referring to only the second coming of Jesus? That is the question. So you see that the cradle presupposes the birth or the rebirth, the return of some monstrous creature who is going to destroy the present civilization, who is going to unloose anarchy. And later, after the destruction, a new civilization will emerge. And that destruction, recreation process, that cycle was very much popularized by Shelley in Ode to the West Wind. Those who have read it must remember the lines that destruction is very much needed to quicken a new birth. I'm quoting from Shelley. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast its hour came round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Another important reference, Bethlehem. Why Bethlehem? Because Bethlehem was supposed to be the birthplace of Jesus. Jesus's parents had traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and there Jesus was born. Now, is Yeats trying to modify the biblical message? Is he trying to give us a new vision, a new idea that Jesus will be reborn? Meaning, it may refer to the restoration of innocence, restoration of order after the disorder loosened by the sphinx-like monster. Maybe. I'm quoting from Bloom, 2-3 lines that will help you understand. Bloom says, this is the male sphinx who had haunted Yeats ever since he had read Shelley's Ozymandias in his youth, as distinct from the female sphinx who had served as a muse of destruction for the poets and painters of his tragic generation. The Egyptian Sphinx is a kind of demonic parody of one of the cherubim of Ezekiel's vision. The cherubim, taken by Blake as the archetype of his Eurygen, whose stony sleep in the book of Eurygen is used by Yeats in the poem. So, the first thing that I may again refer to is that while reading the poem, we must not stick to the Bible only, because the poem incorporates both biblical and pagan references, references from his predecessors like William Blake, even from Miltonic vision. So you see that the second coming is a kind of poem that crosses the temporality, because it curiously amalgamates different imagery, different symbols from different sources. And most importantly, Yeats is said to have got some words for the poem from those automatic sessions. Okay, that regularly was held in his house. Okay, and let us go back to the first stanza again. The loss of the center, because the center cannot hold, natural love cannot endure. If the center is lost, if the authority is lost, natural love is drowned. And of course, here we find an allusion to Promethean suffering, because in the Greek mythology, Prometheus was the figure of endurance. Okay. Okay. Here I end the first poem, The Second Coming. There are many students, there are many students of mine I can see on the screen. Do you have any kind of question from the first poem? Any kind of suggestion? Anything, any commentary?
Saurabh,
Then I will go to the second
Saurabh,
one.
we will give them the chance at the end of the lecture. Okay. Please go
Okay,
on
fine.
with the next poem. And
Okay,
we will,
thank you.
yes, we have the interactive session at the end.
Okay, fine. The second poem that I will discuss is the Wild Swans at Cool, and I hope that many of you have read the poem already. The Wild Swans at Cool uh, and the Second Coming can be regarded as poems, but they are they may be called sisters, but they are always quarreling with each other. You know that sisters quarrel with each other. If Yeats was envisioning the regeneration, the destruction and the regeneration of the order in the second coming, in the Wild Swans at Cool, is looking back into the past. So if in the second coming he is looking into the future, in the Wild Swans at Cool, he is looking back into the past. Uh, has been influenced by Ode to the West Wind by Shelley, and there is another poem by Thomas Hardy called The Darkling Thrush, another bird poem. What Shelley explored in Ode to the West Wind is that Shelley was invoking the West Wind to regenerate, to revive his lost vitalities, to revive his lost energy, poetic fertility, etc. In the Wild Swans at Cool, there is no such invocation. There is no such attempt to to revive his vitality, because it's knew that it won't happen. And here lies his modernist vision, and here he distanced himself carefully from the romantics. Cool is an estate owned by the Gregories. And when Yeats visited the Cool for the first time, it was in 1897, he was only 32-year-old at the time. In the poem, Yeats is referring to the Cool and is revisit to the Cool for a second time. And he revisited the Cool in 1916, when he was 51, after 19 years. And the dimension of visit and revisit, this dimension is very familiar to the students of literature. We are reminded of the Tinton Abbey. You remember Tinton Abbey? Wordsworth visited and revisited the bank of the Wye. The trees are in their autumn beauty. The poem begins in this way. The trees are in their autumn beauty. Autumn is a significant season in the poem because the poet is already 51. So for the season, it was autumn. For the poet, it was autumn. He was standing in the autumn of his life. The trees are in their autumn beauty. And autumn is beautiful by Yeats. We may quote Shakespeare here. Ripeness is all. Mellowness is to some extent glorified by Yeats. The trees are in their autumn beauty. Nature looks beautiful in any season. The woodland paths are dry for the lack of rain. This dryness or dreariness has been interpreted by critics to be poetic infertility. Under the October twilight, the water mirrors a still sky. Actually, the sky is not still, the water is still, and the still water mirrors the sky, and hence the sky looks still. Upon the brimming water, among the stones are 950 swans. This number of swans is quite significant. But before that, let me tell you what swans are and what types of bird swans are. Swan, being the being Indians, and especially most of us are acquainted with Ramakrishna and his teachings, they must have read about Ramakrishna's reference to swans, because swan was perhaps his favorite bird. Because the swans they have proverbially long lifespan. Their behavior closely resembles the human world, the society, because a particular swan has a particular mate. The swan is said to separate the milk from the water. I do not know how far it is true, but it is said that they can separate the milk from the water, etc. And swans, since they have a very long lifespan, in the poem, the swans symbolize the meeting line, the time and the timeless. The swans connect the time and the timeless. And in the poem, Yeats is juxtaposing two things: the eternal cycle of death and rebirth in nature, and he is contrasting this eternal cycle to the transient life of man on this earth. So he saw 950 swans, and if a swan has a mate, then why is one swan single? This alienation of the swan from its mate has confused the readers. And many of the readers have interpreted the absence of a swan to be Yeats's tragic love, romantic life, because you know that he has been many times rejected by Morgan. So many of us consider that absent swan to be Yeats's muse, to be Yeats's mate. The 19th autumn has come upon me. Since I first made my count, I saw before I had well finished, all suddenly mount and scatter wheeling in a great broken rings upon their clamorous wings. So I have revisited the place after 19 years, just as Wordsworth revisited Tinton Abbey. And I made my count. Look at the tense. It is in the past. So he's referring to, he's counting the swans the first time he visited the cool park. I saw before I had well finished. He's referring back to that incident, to that time, that when he came to the cool park, then he saw those swans and he was counting the swans. And before he could complete counting, the swans suddenly mounted up, scattering, wheeling in great broken rings. When the swans, they fly up, they wheel in the air, and they produce glinting circles in the air above his head. Upon their clamorous wings, I have looked upon those brilliant creatures. There's a shift from the past to the present perfect. I have looked upon those brilliant creatures. The swans were brilliant 19 years ago. The swans are brilliant 19 years after. And now my heart is sore. At the time, Yeats has been suffering from many kinds of crises. Morgan rejected him, married McBride. There was complication in their marriage. Yeats proposed Morgan's daughter. He married Georgie, and his daughter Annie was born. And during that time, Georgie was suffering from Spanish flu. So personally, it was very bad time for Yeats. So Yeats said that my heart is sore, my heart is injured, as if time has eroded my heart. All stains since I, hearing at twilight, the first time on this shore, the bell beat of their wings above my head, trod with lighter tread. So he is simply contrasting his past vitality, vigor with the present weakness. That he has lost his vitality, he has lost his vigor, he has lost his energy. Nature is in autumn, the poet is in autumn, but very significantly, the nature will revive herself in the next spring. And I am reminded of that soliloquy in Macbeth. You remember, I hope, my ways of life are fallen into sheer ill leaf. Macbeth also compared himself to autumn. So he trod with a lighter tread 19 years ago. He was very jubilant at that time because he was younger. Unwearied still, lover by lover, they paddle in the cold, companionable stream or climb the air. Look at the word still. The still is very important word. Till may suggest despite the passage of time, despite 19 years have passed, the swans have retained their vitality. And they are as passionately paddling in the cold stream as they used to do 19 years ago. The companionable stream or climb the air, their hearts have not grown old. He is contrasting himself with the swans as well as with nature. Passion or conquest wonder where they will attend upon them still. Passion for each other, conquest with the rival birds, for claiming their own rights. Everything remains the same with the swans, with the world of the birds, but everything has changed in the world of Yeats. That is the universal tragedy of humankind on this earth. What is lost forever. But now they drift on the still water. Again, the word still is repeated. Mysterious, beautiful. The swans are called mysterious, beautiful because they are mysteriously beauty even after 19 years. And he is not only referring to the physical brilliance of the swans, he's also referring to the spiritual beauty of the swans, their passionate intensity that they have successfully retained over the 19 years. Among what rushes will they build? By what lakes, age or pool, delight men's eyes when I awake someday to find they have flown away. And in the last few lines, Yeats has returned to his conscious self, just like John Keats at the end of To Nightingale. And Yeats is surmising that perhaps the swans will fly away to some warmer region when winter will come. And they will build their nest among the rushes on a different shore, on a foreign shore. And they will not delight my eyes, but the lines may refer to another possibility. And the possibility is that these swans that Yeats is encountering after 19 years may not be those swans that he encountered before 19 years ago. It may be, because Yeats is saying that the birds will migrate. So if they will migrate, probably those swans had already migrated. Probably the swans are not eternal, as Yeats is representing them in the poem. Okay, so you see that there is a journey from Yeats's romantic vision to the modernist realization, a kind of awakening. He's talking of an awakening, that I will be awakened one day. So he's talking of awakening, a kind of realization, and this awakening has been compared with the resurrection by many readers of the poem, that probably Yeats is thinking of his own death and consequent resurrection, that he will wake up one morning and he will find that the swans have flown away to some other shore, to some foreign shore. here I end my lecture because I know that there is another session today. So I, on the behalf of the host, would request the audience. Do you have any question, please? You may ask
Thank
for.
thank you, Samrat. Sorry, thank you, Saurabh. This is really engaging, informative, and abstract talk. And now the forum is open for our participants to clear their doubts and queries. You may ask question either by asking the question directly to our resource person, or may drop your queries in the drop box, in the chat box. Okay, there is a question, Saurabh, in the chat box. Amrita Pritam, I'm quoting his word. Sir, thank you so much for enlightening us in such a beautiful and organic way. Can you please say something about the title of your presentation, the date of the time? Is there any link to Nietzsche?
Yes, actually, when I titled the presentation as the date of time, I did not, honestly, I did not think about the Nietzschean date of God, etc. But because Nietzsche envisioned the death of God in a different context. Okay, but of course, you know that you may relate the title to the notion that Nietzsche offered to us. But honestly, I never thought of Nietzsche while entitling my presentation as the death of time. I was actually thinking about the mockery of time and how Yeats played with timeliness, temporality, and immortality, etc. In his poem, and all through his life, he has been object or subject to time's million accidents, because many things happen to him. For the constraint of time, I'm not able to say everything about W.B. Yeats, because there are many more things that I wanted to say, because you know that there is another session, and of course 1 hour is much. Okay, is there any other question?
Yes. There is another question from Chanchal Ghosh. Sir, what is apocalyptic poetry?
Okay, Chonchol is my student. Uh, Apocalyptic poem, actually, Chonchol, apocalyptic poem. First of all, you have to understand apocalypse. The word apocalypse is a biblical term. And in the last chapter of the Bible, Revelation, it has been prophesied that when the world will come to an end, Jesus will return on this earth. Okay. And according to the Bible and many other scriptures, every civilization exists for 2000 years. So you know that Yeats was writing the poem in 1919, and it was published in 1921. So of course, probably Yeats was thinking that it is the end of Christianity, that a new world order is going to replace Christianity. So he wrote many poems that define this apocalypse. Okay, so this is called apocalyptic poem. And apocalypse is not present only in the Bible, only in the Christianity. No, even in the Quranic text, you know that at the end of this Kali Yuga, Avatara Kali will come and destroy the world. Satya Yuga will start. So these are the apocalyptic visions. Actually, if you read Derrida, you will see that Derrida says that golden age is a myth. That golden age never existed. Every civilization dreamt of golden age. Every civilization dreamt of apocalypse. That the world will come to an end and the Satya Yuga, the Ram Rajya will be established. So that kind of expectation is actually very romantic. It's a romantic longing present in every civilization. So that is apocalyptic poetry.
There is another question from Sudipta Banerjee. Can you explain the number trick that Yeats practiced in most of his poems?
Actually, Yeats Yeats practiced most of his poem. Yeats has used dates and years, like Easter, etc., like Cool Park and Balili, 1931, etc. Probably Yeats was dating his text. This is a very relevant question that you asked. Yeats dated his poems probably to contextualize what he was dealing with in that poem, because Yeats's poetry is very much temporal, very much temporal. Meaning, one phase came, he wrote a type of poems. Another phase comes, he changed himself. That is what is important about Yeats. And he is perhaps one of the very few writers who had the capability of that dynamic transformation. He underwent, at the very beginning of my lecture, I have already mentioned that Yeats underwent dynamic transformation. If you read Yeats, the poems written in his first phase of his career and the poem written in the last phase of his career, those poems are markedly different, markedly different. And the poems also not divided by time, the poems divided by spirit also. Those poems also deal with different things. So Yeats wrote poems that were very much temporal, very much temporal. Okay,
So, am I?
yes, Sudipta Banerjee. Sudipta.
Yes, sir. Actually, I want to ask that the odd number system, like in the poem that you explained in this Wild Swan, there's a 59 number. Again, in Lake Isle of Innisfree, Lake Isle of Innisfree, we have seen that there is a 9 number. So this kind of fascination for odd number that Yeats actually practiced in most of his poems, I was basically harping on this.
Actually, I have already mentioned it while lecturing on the Wild Swans, that many readers find the odd number symbolizing the absence of Yeats's partner and his tragic life. But personally, I feel that kind of interpretation flashy to some extent. But the interpretation is there that Yeats was fond of odd number because his life was tragic. He was feeling alienated because of the multiple rejections by Morcom. Okay, that absent swan in the poem 59. So there is a swan that is absent, probably dead or separated from its mate. Okay, so that kind of reading is there. That perhaps the absent swan symbolizes or represents Morcom in that case.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Welcome. Is there any other question?
No, thank you, sir.
Chinmoy, hello.
There is another question.
Okay.
There is another question. Prasanjit Das asked, why the swan are called as brilliant creatures?
The swans are, this thing I have already addressed in the interpretation of the poem. The swans are called brilliant not only because of their brilliant appearance, because the swans, you know, that they are white, and especially they look very brilliant when the sunbeams fall on them. That is the brilliance of their appearance. But perhaps Yeats is also referring to the brilliance of their spirit, the vigor, the brilliance of their vigor, the brilliance of their energy that they have retained surprisingly, even though 19 years have passed. And Yeats, very significantly, has dwindled, has grown older. Okay, his heart is so. You may contrast the two things. My heart is so, and the brilliant creature. How he's contrasting himself, his decay, with the timelessness of the swans. And that is why at the very beginning of this poem, I say that the swans represent the meeting line between the time and the timeless. Okay.
Dr. Seema Sarkar, ma'am, asked, can the title Second Coming be interpreted to the new normal of present pandemic situation?
Yes, of course, of course. Of course, Dr. Seema Sarkar. Of course, this is the universal appeal of Yeats's poetry. The second coming, and that is why I question the very existing body of interpretation of the poem "The Second Coming," because presently many scholars, many students, even teachers interpret the poem as from purely Christian point of view. But I am not willing to accept this single. What should I say? That kind of a single-threaded interpretation, because Yeats says The Second Coming is a universal poem. Though it was written in the aftermath of the First World War, keeping the Russian Revolution in mind, but the poem is absolutely relevant. If you look at the present situation, you will understand how the ceremony of innocence is drowned, and how the anarchists, how the words are full of passionate intensity. Everywhere you will see it, not only in India, every country, you will see the same situation, the loss of the center. And the loss of the center also defines the very modernist spirit, because what is modernism? That loss of the center and search for the center, isn't it? So the poem is temporal, at the same time it is timeless.
Rivana Chaudhary remarks, thank you so much, sir, for the amazing lecture. As you know, mysticism and the occult occur again and again in Yeats's poetry, most explicitly in the Second Coming, but also in poems such as Sailing to Byzantium.
Correct.
So, how occultism also had a great impact on Yeats's poetic career?
Actually, occultism had no contribution to his career. He did not uh, become famous, or he did not prosper as a poet because he practiced occultism. No, but occultism was a thing he was fond of, and not only occultism. Yeats was also fond of the Indian tantra as well, because he was acquainted with Mohini Chatterjee, and he took much interest in the tantric things. So occultism, I think, had no contribution to its career, but occultism obviously influenced his poems, the poetic makeup, of course, because in the Second Coming, for example, there are many words that Yeats is supposed to get from that kind of occult practices. Okay.
There are again a lot of questions in the chat, but I would like to select some of the questions because of the time limitation. There is a question from Dev Chandra Chakraborty. Sir, you mentioned that swans are symbolized for the connection of time and timelessness. Please explain that.
Okay, very good question. Actually, what are the swans? The swans are birds. Think very logically, and the swans are not immortal, but the swans are fabulously. They have fabulously long lifespan. Okay, so to the poet, to a man, to a human being, the swans have very miraculously retained their formal strength. And what is the man? The man has lost his strength, his energy, his vigor just in 19 years. Only 19 years have passed, 2 decades, and he lost everything. Just think about this kind of that irony, because the swans, even after 19 years, are full of the passionate intensity. They are full of passion and conquest. That is the vitality to fight against the rival birds for their own existence and survival. So the swans, though they are birds, but to some extent in the poem, the swans stand for the immortality, the timelessness. And that is why I say the swans represent the meeting line between the time and the timeless. That is why. Because on the one hand, the swans are birds, but on the other hand, the swans are representatives of timeless, changelessness. Okay.
There is another question from Arga Kamal Guhara, one of our students. In his poem, The Second Coming, what does Yeats mean by mere anarchy? Why the anarchy is mere?
Anarchy is mere. Actually, mere, I think mere means only. And Yeats is using the word mere to intensify the word anarchy. Mere anarchy, simple anarchy. Only anarchy is loosed upon the world. Nothing but anarchy is loosed upon the world. That is what he is trying to suggest. That we are in such hard times, we are in such hard situation, that only anarchy is everywhere. Because you know that good and evil are complementary as well as contradictory. Okay, but for Yeats, only anarchy is there. There is no order. The order is totally lost. Order and anarchy exist side by side. just as creation, destruction, day, night, etc. They are binaries. But what Yeats saw in the world is mere anarchy. There is no order, only anarchy. Understood? And when there is only anarchy, apocalypse is inevitable. Try to understand this. In other times, both order and disorder exist. But before the apocalypse, only disorder will exist. There will be no order. Only disorder. That is why the word mere is used by Yeats. Okay. Is there any other question or comment?
Yes, there is a question from Kosiki Day. Is the poem The Second Coming somehow connected to the 1918-1919 flu pandemic, as his pregnant wife Georgia was caught by the virus and
Yes,
very
of course. Yes, of course. This was one of the factors, of course, because his wife was suffering from Spanish flu. Of course, why not?
And the last question here is from Sneha Circle. Sir, what is occultism?
Occultism is a kind of supernatural practice. Occult is the supernatural, meaning there are many schools of occultism. Though I am not a master of occult studies, so I cannot explain to you what the various occult schools profess. But very briefly, occultism is a kind of supernatural practice. Occult is the unknown. Okay, so when you meaning practicing planchet is an occultism. Okay, I hope you understand what occultism is. Meaning a kind of supernatural practice that incorporates various tantric nomenclatures as well. Okay, so this kind of thing is occultism. And if you are interested in reading occultism, there are various books. Contact me. I will tell you the names. You can read about occultism in details.
Is there any other question from any participant? Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes. Hello.
So first of all, sir, thank you, sir, for your outstanding lecture. Sir, I have a question. Sir, by the title, Thingsful Effort, what did by the title Thingsful Effort? What did Chinua Achebe mean to say? Actually, was it a real meaning? What W.B. Yeats expressed in the poem Second Coming?
Can you repeat the question? There was some. Can you please repeat the question?
Sir, my question is by the title Thingsful Effort, what did Chinua Achebe mean? Was it real meaning? What W.B. Yeats expressed in the poem Second Coming?
Oh, so you want to know what is the relationship between the title of Chinua Achebe's novel Things Fall Apart and the line, the Yeatsian line, isn't it? Is it the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes,
actually, you see that. Okay. Actually, Chinua Achebe used the title, used the line "Things Fall Apart" for the title of his the novel, 1958 novel, the Things Fall Apart. But of course, there is a significant difference because what Chinua Achebe was writing, he was writing in a Nigerian context, and you have to understand the cultural difference. Okay, Yeats was writing in an Irish culture. He was an Irish from Ireland, and Achebe was from Nigeria. So you see that culturally, of course, the difference will exist. Okay, but in the novel, Achebe is also referring to the lack of authority or loss of authority. If you read the novel, you will see how the protagonist Okonno. I hope you have read the novel. So if you have read the novel, you know that how Okonno is gradually losing his authority, and not only Okonno but many other characters in the novel, they witness the gradual loss of authority in the novel. Okay, so Achebe used the line "Things Fall Apart" in a different way, in a post-colonial context, of course.
Yes.
Is there any question from YouTube, Janto?
Thank you, Chandra. No, there are some
comments about the PPT, but no question has been asked on YouTube.
Then let us move towards the Thanksgiving session. And of course, thank you, Saurabh. This is
Welcome.
really an interesting interactive session. And uh, on behalf of the department of both Kharagpur College and EGRA SSB College, I, Chinmay Mandal, would like to thank Dr. Saurav Kumar Nag for giving us his kind consent to deliver a lecture in our lecture series for our students and scholars. Hope our students gained a lot from this lecture, that is W.B. Yeats and the Death of Time. It was really an informative, illuminating, and awestruck talk, and no word is enough to describe your wisdom, your way of presentation, and especially your pronunciation and energy.
Thank you. Thank you
And
very much.
it has been a matter of great pleasure, Saurabh, to listen you time and time again. Uh, and finally, I would like to thank all the students, teachers, organizers, and scholars across the globe for their kind consent. And there is one more declaration, important declaration for the participants over here. That is Dr. Elizabeth Marino of University of Rome had given her kind consent to deliver a speech today at 1:30 p.m. I am repeating, today at 1:30 p.m. For which I request all the participants to take a quick break and join sharply at 1:30 p.m. Hope we will meet again at 1:30 p.m. And with these words of greeting, I do hereby declare the end of the session. Thank you all. Thank you, Sarabda.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, goodbye.